Time for the local network. Reporters Neil Walker and David Clayton are looking at the wireless. Is there anyone out there?
Hello. Well, you obviously like listening to radio, but what choices have you? There are 4 national networks, all BBC, lots of local radio stations, either commercial independents or, again, BBC. But there's a whole host of tiny stations beavering away, making programmes you've never heard and can't tune into in some cases. Hospital radio's a good example, which only patients can hear, and there are, of course, DJs in shops, things like that.
But all that is going to change when the government introduces community radio, small stations transmitting to a very specific audience. And it's likely that those people running the existing tiny stations will be standing first in line for the licences. So what will they sound like? Well, in 1970, United Biscuits started their own radio. Studios in the factory at Osterley, transmitting to thousands of loudspeakers at factories in Liverpool, Manchester, London and Glasgow. To keep the workers on the biscuit lines happy, it was the birth of industrial radio.
The home of good baking, super sound UBM.
If you're working on a production line, perhaps looking at the Jaffa cakes coming out of the machine, checking they're all right, it is actually very, very dull. So UBN provided a highly professional and competent radio station, but also one tailored individually for that market.
There was sometimes a competition between the Indian ladies and ourselves, you know, who was going to turn it up the loudest, because we all had our speakers above our heads, and because we had Indian music as well, and we'd turn it up or turn it down, you know. So it was a major part of our lives, really.
And the shadows there with a track called Bombay Duck. No, latter day. I know I mentioned Bombay, but don't get overexcited. Later, love, all right? 18 after 10 o'clock, UBN time. Still with the Alan King programme, I'm very relieved to say.
Instead of sticking up posters which people don't tend to read, like notice boards, etc., it was a very good opportunity to get a message across, and UBN got a message punched across in 25 seconds, 30 seconds.
Why not embrace your feet with loving care? Buy them some
safety shoes.
Wash your hands in the basins. Oh, please wash your hands in the basins. Please wash them on leaving the toilets. And then you'll come out nice and clean.
All around the factory we had what were called calling cards. They were little postcard-sized, pre-printed cards. They would fill in the request, who they wanted to dedicate it to. Those came in, I mean, literally in their thousands.
And I had a booklet of all the rock and roll records that I liked. I used to spend my whole weekend just sitting on a chair and writing every record out that I wanted.
So how many requests a week were you putting in?
I had 250.
Penguins were very upmarket because different lines came from different areas. The Bandits, I think, were in Liverpool. I can't remember where Penguins were. And you got different groups of people, different bunches of girls who all clubbed together. And it was really very much a club feeling.
Alrighty, there we go. That's a little number for you that time. We've got a request coming up right now for a couple of girls down there in Osterley. Let's call up Jane, Ellie, and all the girls working on the chocolate wheat mill line. And you got a request here, girls, with lots of love from Rosie, who works down there in Harleston on the sponge drops.
In those days, United Biscuits was getting up to about 80% staff turnover, and it dropped by 40 or 50% within 2 weeks of UBN starting. I mean, it was tremendous. I think if you looked closer into some industries, you would find the same problems exist. In the motor companies, there's still a lot of handwork being done, a lot of repetitive work, and people really don't like repetitive work. They like to have something else, and radio is something that can be used for that. In the same way that we listen to the radio when we drive. You can't watch television when we drive, and you can't watch television whilst you're packing biscuits or making motor cars, but you can listen to the radio.
The home of good baking, super sound UBN.
Yeah, Roger Sinclair, the founder of UBN, having the final word there and wishing industrial radio would make a comeback, because sadly UBN folded after only 9 years, mostly because of the cost at a time when biscuit factories were closing down.
Now, the BBC and ILR have local radio stations, but most of the time they can't hope to do justice to specific communities. They're covering counties and large metropolitan areas, except when they're based on islands. Now, Radio Jersey, for example, has such a clearly defined boundary that you'd fall off the edge of it. They have a maximum audience of something like 80,000 people, give or take a few tourists. The community link is so strong that the islanders depend on the small station for vital daily information.
To do with the structure, which is in danger of collapsing. And the national newspapers won't be in the shops before mid-afternoon. The plane carrying the papers and mail was delayed because of bad visibility at the airport and only touched down at 1:30.
I suppose things are very important to us that maybe you wouldn't even consider. When we go on air at 2 minutes to 7 before the 7 o'clock news, we must tell the island that the papers and mail have arrived. Otherwise, the phones are just red hot. And if they haven't arrived, we have to keep them informed throughout the day when they're going to arrive. One day last week, we had one story, and it was very sad news, and it came quite high up in our bulletin, really. It was that a very well-known police dog had died. And he rated 3 paragraphs because he was a well-known and well-loved member of the community. He'd been seen on Bergerac, he'd seen at Fates and this sort of thing. And that caused a lot of reaction.
There's always a joke when I meet my managers, other managers, and I say, well, I've got 25% of the staff on leave this week, which means one of them's away. But I had to do the early morning shift and read the news and that sort of thing. And sometimes if things go wrong, we don't have an engineer here, we have one in Guernsey. But it's not unknown for me to be seen with a saw or a hammer and nail or even a soldering iron.
Radio Jersey in the summertime, the island's favorite sound.
You've got to remember on this island, it's a very tight community. Our politicians are amateurs. We don't have any professional politicians. And so if you're going to make sweeping political criticisms or have a bash at what you think are bad political decisions, you're going to offend an awful lot of people.
Does that mean then the output tends to be a bit uncontroversial, a bit bland?
I would say it's uncontroversial, but not necessarily bland.
Now, I do get the impression that if I, as an outsider, were to listen to Radio Jersey, I wouldn't find it that interesting because it is so specifically local.
Well, one of their most listened to programmes is really a list of numbers. It's the draw of the Island Lottery. Now, you wouldn't find anything interesting in that as an outsider, unless, of course, you had a ticket that might win £35,000. But if you think that's a sort of narrow community appeal, you must try and get a listen to Loughborough Campus Radio, LCR, which broadcasts to the students of Loughborough on a low-power, medium-wave transmitter. There are lots of university radio stations, they're not alone. But at Loughborough, students fill their spare time staffing the station 24 hours a day, playing mostly music. But their local news consists of student union propaganda and the university's sporting activities. The quality of presentation varies from, I suppose, the naff to the quite professional. Alison Martin became programme controller within 3 months of joining the university.
The actual presenters they're not being paid or anything, so they don't owe me anything. And I can get a knock on my door at 11 o'clock at night and someone say, oh, sorry, I can't do the programme tomorrow morning, I've got an exam. And so I will have to then get up at 6:30 in the morning, come down and do the show myself. Can be a little bit of a pain sometimes, takes up a lot of time, I can assure you. My degree is not going very well.
I was going to say, how does it fit in with your work?
Well, I'm lucky, I'm an art student.
Well, we've got 3 minutes to get this ready. Can anybody here type faster than Paul?
Yeah, I can, I expect.
We get news from a variety of sources. The main news is actually from the campus itself, which we collect on our own recorders down at the Union itself and edit the stuff from then on. We also collect national and international stories from a mixture of teletext and local and national radio, because we can't send our correspondents to the West Bank and Gaza Strip, quite obviously.
So you're nicking stories from the BBC, are you?
We are not nicking stories from the BBC for the sake of nicking them. We're giving the stories out to the people who are listening to us because they need that service.
Playing all over the campus on 963 kHz medium wave and direct in stereo to the Union Building, this is LCR.
With the LCR News at 1, this is Dave Lamb and Duncan Carman. Following a fire on board a sealing ferry earlier this week,
I listen to Workbeat, which is what they have 7 till 9 at night, which is just continuous records, and it's easy to work to, and I listen in the morning for what's on campus.
I listened to it a few times in the sort of mid-morning shows, but
on those shows, it seems like there's sort of 4 or 5 people in the studio. There's not many records played, and it seems like there's just mucking about and as if they're drunk in the studio or something.
It sort of adds to the sort of communal atmosphere of the place, I guess.
I don't listen to it much. I prefer Radio 1.
Well, they are a very enthusiastic bunch with professional studios, and they would like to expand by getting hold of a community radio licence to broadcast to the rest of Loughborough.
I wonder if the rest of Loughborough will appreciate the student union news. There are some community stations already, places like Thamesmead to the east of London, which transmits via a cable system into the homes of the local population. They've lurched on from year to year, started originally by a vicar, financed for a time by the GLC, and now 10 years later struggling to keep going. When the latest manager, Bob Smith, arrived from commercial radio, he says the output was in a shambles. Most of the staff are unpaid. Frequently they turned up 30 minutes late or didn't turn up at all, but Smith says they are serving the community and will get a bigger audience when they can have a frequency and a transmitter.
We have on Radio Thamesmead some of the worst presenters on the radio anywhere. I defend their right to be there because for them it's a huge step forward. They've probably never even stood up in the pub and had a good argument on a Saturday night about a major issue. They've been reticent, they've been careful about what they say. Suddenly they're broadcasting on their own station. But in fact what happens is that that person does grow week by week, does get a reaction, and somebody else who comes in, tremendously polished, well organised, good producer of programmes, gets no reaction at all.
To take a view of the extremes of what we might get with community radio, on the one hand we could be seeing a radio that's just somewhere for emotional cripples. On the other hand, it could be seen as a way of a license to print money. Now, where does community radio fall between those two?
Well, there again, you see, I think it's going to be different things in different places. I'm violently anti-pirate. I think it's totally wrong. Now, I listen to pirate radio to gauge what we're competing with. It's overwhelmingly music. It's overwhelmingly broadcasting to specific communities. My concept of community radio is everybody talking together. We actually act as a parish pump where everyone stands around, exchange their views, rather than sort of little ghetto broadcasting. I'm very much opposed to that.
Well, Bob Smith mentioned pirate radio stations there, and the Department of Trade and Industry, who deal with such matters, say that there are 50 stations in London and about another 50 pirate radio stations around the country. Now, they're called pirates because they hijack a radio frequency, and what's more, they don't pay royalties on the music they play. Although they get income from adverts, it's a very clandestine business.
But the pirates say that they provide a service that there's a clear demand for, and they wouldn't have to operate illegally if the government had recognised the need and allocated the frequencies earlier. Sunshine Radio had a huge following in South Shropshire and the West Midlands, operating on the BBC's frequency. But they closed down 4 years ago on the promise that a licence would be forthcoming within months, and they're still waiting. But in fact, they wouldn't have even got started if it hadn't been for a local farmer giving them the top floor of his dusty old granary. He became so keen that he went from doing his farming news to producing the sport, but then he gave that up because he was missing all the football matches.
Sunshine Radio on a Saturday afternoon. Good afternoon, and it's the sports programme between 2 and 6 today, the 4th of February 1984, and that's Paul McCartney. Take it away. Good afternoon from me, Alan Jones. Jones with the music, not to mention the cold, and Alan Clark has the sport.
Good afternoon from the sports desk, and this afternoon we have racing, football, rugby and cricket for you. And I've got a good tip for you today at racing.
Thought it was a bit of a laugh at first, and we thought it would probably only go 4 or 6 weeks. We thought that at the most. We set up the transmitters in 2 spare bedrooms we got, because it's a big old farmhouse, which were above the kitchen. And that's how we started, with the transmitters in the old bedrooms above the kitchen, and the studio in an old garage. Although they said on television it was a cowshed, it was actually an old granary.
Sunshine Radio. All Hit Radio.
This is Adrian Coles back again with local council news. Now, some dates for your diaries. On Wednesday, the 18th of April, Clibberry Mortimer Parish Council Yes, well, I was asked to do this short passage on council business, and I welcome the opportunity. So often nobody quite knows what's going on. They read some bits and pieces in the paper, and although the newspapers do a very good job, they can't quite give it as it might be from the horse's mouth. So I'm on 3 councils, the county, the district and the parish, and I used to do a 20-minute programme on Sunshine. People were very pleased to hear what was going on.
Fussy people.
No, I can't either.
Good afternoon, Adrian.
All the kids. Adrian Cole's in the studio.
Yeah.
Hello, Adrian.
The Major. It's the man with the hedgehogs.
That's him. Yeah, he hasn't brought any crisps with him.
The whole idea of Sunshine, and that was always kind of said to you, was go in, do your stuff, but have fun and enjoy it, because that's what it was there for. It was a fun station. Even though it was a fun station, it was taken very seriously by all the jocks. Everybody wanted to do as good a job as they could. And because of this freedom, I think the station developed and became as big as it did because of the friendliness of the disc jockeys.
I don't think you have to have professional high-powered programming to make an impact. They were normal people. How you doing, old mate? It was the Old Mates Act, I think, and it was that sort of communication, which is what it's all about at the end of the day, and the communication used to flow quite well between the presenter and the listener.
Oh, is it finished? I was starting to enjoy that. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes?
Is it cigarettes?
Is what cigarettes?
Mystery voice.
I'm sorry, I must have got the wrong number. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Bye. I died terrible. See if it works a second time. Good morning.
Good morning. There is cigarettes.
What number are you calling?
Your number, James.
This is... no, you can't shout knickers down the telephone.
Mind you, the pirates are still saying knickers to the DTI, who've just been allocated another £400,000 of taxpayers' money to track them down. And the government isn't getting a lot of support from the courts. The maximum fine is £2,000. The average last year was only £200. The Skull and Crossbones has no incentive to stop flying.
But the nice thing about radio is that it seems anyone and everyone can have a go. Radio Newcastle told us about one of their rivals, Radio Brockwell. Now, they're not that worried at the moment because their target audience is one, the headmaster of Brockwell Middle School at Cranlington in Northumberland. Now, the kids have been told that if they can make successful radio programmes, he might find a bit of money to further the project. And even at such a tender age, they recognise how to court a popular market.
And now for the bit you've all been waiting for. The new soap, which has specially been made for you, listeners of Radio Brockwell, Nearly Neighbours.
Everybody needs good neighbours.
It's taken off and they enjoy doing it, and the actual neighbours, the street, Brook Street, which is Nearly Neighbours, is set in, and in Cramington, because it's a new town where houses are building up all the time, I think the kids have got into it and they've realised certain emotions that people have, or difficulty or problems or conflicts, and they've got together and it's taken off from there.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Cooper.
I don't think I've seen you around here before. Are you new to the area?
I'm George Henderson. I've just moved in down the road.
Oh, nice to meet you. Come in and have a cup of coffee. How do you know my name?
I was talking to Mrs. Crabtree about you.
It's a Cramlington-based soap opera that's about a new housing estate, and it's got all sorts of characters moving into it, and some get along and some don't. The Ramp family, everyone thinks they're thugs because they're not as well off as the rest of them, and the Coopers are the main family, and the father of that family works in the show house of the new estate, and there's Mrs. Crabtree, and she's a busybody of the place, and they're really the main characters.
It's to do with emotions and feelings anyway, the people in there, and also it's their writing. I mean, the most important thing is they're writing together, they're sharing ideas, and they're put in situations, so they're actually writing a script. You get an awful lot of good English work from use of radio. I think it's something that's alive, and I think the kids respond to it very well as well.
That's when good neighbours become
Only if Mr. Potter agrees to Radio Brockwell will you hear the next exciting episode of Nearly Neighbours.
Oh, go on, Mr. Potter, get into the radio business.
Well, a man who is in the radio business is Howard Rose, the editor of the industry's magazine Now Radio. Howard, from what you've heard and what you know, is that what community radio is going to sound like?
I think a lot of it will do. And there'll be quite a lot of Radio Brockwells around. Certainly also Radio Thamesmead will be duplicated in many ways. I hope that a lot of people will stop and think and realise that news and information is perhaps in many, many cases the most important element of programming.
But speech radio does take a lot of time and indeed a lot of money, and they're running around at Loughborough trying to get the news bulletins together just in time. Are these community radio stations going to be staffed enough and have enough money?
Well, they're going to have to pull up their socks. I mean, the existing stations certainly will have to as well. I would like to see stations like Loughborough broadcasting to the whole of Loughborough, not just the campus. A lot of the people who work on that station are seriously interested in radio. They would like to go a bit further. If a campus radio station could broadcast to the city, the whole city nearby, I think it would do the university good, and certainly the broadcasters, and make them look out a bit further and be more interested than just what's happening down at the Students' Union, in the bar, or little in-jokes that creep in, especially on student radio.
Many of the pirate radio stations are in it to make money. They'll presumably be applying for licences as well. Is there a danger that they'll apply under the community banner and then forget the community aspect once they've got the licence?
Well, I and those correspondents who work with me all hope that the pirates or the commercial radio lobby will go to the radio authority and say, we are a commercial radio station, we want a licence. And be as honest as that. There is nothing wrong with operating a commercial radio station. There should be no need to go to the radio authority under the guise of being community radio, if that is what you aren't going to be.
And when will we see the community radio stations opening?
There appears to be a delay with introducing legislation this autumn. We hope next autumn, that's the autumn of 1989, it'll finally go through Parliament and be law the following summer.
Howard Rose, thank you very much.
Well, if being a good community radio station is all about pleasing your very specific audience, then nowhere is it better demonstrated than with Radio Lollipop. It's a growing international organisation keeping children company in hospital. They don't so much broadcast to them as with them.
Yeah, I suppose you could say it's the ultimate interactive radio, with the presenters playing records and dedications in the studio and Blind Man's Buff and Leapfrog on the wards.
You're listening to Radio Lollipop and it's my favourite.
You're listening to Lollipop, and we just never ever stop. Playing bouncy music and then telling funny jokes, you know it's something that will never stop.
I believe, we talk often and we see in the newspapers of the tremendous medical advances that there are in the health service, but I believe Radio Lollipop has probably made the greatest non-clinical impact on the care of children in hospital than anything else in the last few years.
Hello, this is Cuddly Ken saying, Radio Lollipop's such a thrill, even when you're feeling ill. So sit back and listen to the DJ play a tune for you.
The best thing is it's lots of young people with nice bright ideas and nice bright lives coming on the ward.
And what's the worst thing about it?
The worst thing is they're sometimes too enthusiastic and they get the kids too excited, and then we've got to calm them down again afterwards.
What is the best cure for water on the brain?
A tap on the head?
Yes.
No. Sorry. Any more?
Yes.
Off you go.
Millie, I've changed my mind. Tilly, does it work any better?
There was a 5-year-old that we had on the ward who was terminally ill, and she was quite depressed. And all we could get out of her was yes and no and please and thank you. And the man came from Radio Lollipop and he sat with her for about 2 hours, telling her childish jokes, telling her what was going on and that kind of thing. And he had 2 hours uninterrupted time with this child. And by the end of it, she was actually smiling and talking back to him. And I can remember that incident quite clearly now, even after all these years.
How do you keep an idiot in suspense?
Go on, tell me. Are you there?
Did you get it?
How do you keep an idiot in suspense?
Just like that. Goodbye.
Oh, goodbye.
Local Network came from BBC North East. It was produced by Glyn Jones with Mike Gallagher.